The first time I realized my parents were willing to light my future on fire to keep my sister warm was a Tuesday in January 2026. The kind of Midwest winter day where the sky looks like a dirty dish towel and your breath comes out like you are exhaling your own frustration. I had spent my lunch break in my truck in a parking lot off Ogden Avenue, eating a sad turkey sandwich and staring at an email from our lender that should have made me feel like my whole life was finally clicking into place. Conditional approval for a mortgage, subject to final verification. That was the phrase, and I kept reading it like it might change if I blinked wrong. Tessa and I had been hunting for a house for months, touring beige boxes with fake granite counters and imagining where a dog bed could go, and I had finally managed to line up the down payment without asking anyone for help, which felt important because my family has always treated help like a leash. I wanted something clean. I wanted something that did not come with strings and guilt and my sister's shadow lying across it like a permanent eclipse. I drove straight from work to my parents' place because my mom had texted me earlier that she was making chili and cornbread and that I should come by. That is the sort of message that sounds warm until you realize my mom has never texted my sister to come by, because my sister is always expected to be invited as if she is royalty who might bless the house with her presence. I pulled into the driveway and saw my sister Lauren's white SUV already there, parked crooked like she owned the whole street, and I remember thinking, great, there goes the evening. I had not even shut my truck door before I felt my shoulders rise. My parents' porch light was on even though it was still early, a soft yellow glow spilling onto the snow, and it gave the whole place that cozy sitcom look that our family has never actually earned. Inside, it smelled like cumin and onions and my mom's cinnamon air freshener, and my dad was in his recliner watching a game show like it was his job. Lauren was at the kitchen island with a laptop open, nails tapping, hair perfectly curled like she had a professional team following her around, and she barely looked up when I walked in. She gave me the kind of smile that is technically polite but also says, "You are not part of the main plot." Tessa was not with me, which mattered, because my sister behaves better when there is a witness. Mom kissed my cheek and asked how work was, and before I could answer, she said, sit, we have something to talk about," and that was when the air shifted. I know that shift now, the one where my parents' faces get tight like they have rehearsed something in the mirror, like they have practiced sounding reasonable. We ate the first few bites in forced normal silence, and then my mom wiped her hands on a dish towel and said, "Ben, sweetie, we need you to be flexible right now." My dad muted the TV without looking away, which is his version of taking something seriously. Lauren closed her laptop with this dramatic little click and leaned forward like she was about to pitch a product. My mom continued, "Your sister has an opportunity," and I almost laughed because that word has been used on me like a weapon since Lauren was born. Whenever I had an opportunity, it was framed as a nice little bonus. Whenever Lauren had an opportunity, it was framed like the entire family's survival depended on it. Lauren launched into it, talking fast and bright about a business plan, a wellness brand, a storefront near downtown, and a partnership that would apparently take her from local influencer to national name. She said she had investors interested but that she needed to move quickly. And then my mom slid a folder across the table toward me like she was handing me dessert. I opened it and saw papers with my name printed in the kind of official font that makes your stomach drop. There were bank statements. There was a loan document. There was something about collateral. I looked up and my dad finally turned his head and said, "We took out a home equity line last fall. It was the only way to help Lauren get this off the ground. We thought you would understand." I felt my face go hot, and for a second I could not even speak because all I could hear was the lender's phrase repeating in my head, "Subject to final verification." I stared at the signature line on one of the pages and saw my name signed in looping cursive that looked like mine at first glance but was not mine. Not quite, like someone had tried to copy it in a hurry. My mouth went dry and I said, "What is this?" Lauren's smile faltered just enough to be real, and my mom rushed in with that soothing voice, "Ben, it is not a big deal, it is just paperwork. The bank needed it because you are family and because you have good credit." That was the climactic moment. Right there at my parents' kitchen table with chili cooling in my bowl. When I understood that while I had been scrimping and saving and planning a future with a woman I love, my parents had been using my name like a spare key. I pushed the folder back like it had teeth, and I told them I was not signing anything, that I had not signed anything, and that I wanted to know exactly what they had done. My dad stood up slowly, that heavy disappointed posture he always uses when he wants to look like the adult in the room, and he said, "Do not make this ugly, Ben." That sentence would have been funny if it had not made me feel like I was about to throw up, because they had already made it ugly. They had made it ugly the moment they decided my consent was optional. My mom started crying in that soft, controlled way where she still looks pretty, and she said, "We did not want to bother you, you have your own life now," and I thought, "Yes, I do, and you are setting it on fire." Lauren leaned back in her stool like she was bored, and she said, "You always act like you are the only one with responsibilities, Ben," and I could not believe the audacity of hearing that from the person who has treated responsibility like a rumor. I asked her if she even had real investors, and she rolled her eyes and said, "Of course I do, but no one wants to deal with a family that cannot support its own." My mom nodded like that made sense, like my sister had just explained gravity. My dad said, "If you would just agree to help for a little while, it will not affect you. It is temporary." I went home that night to my apartment, and it felt like the walls were moving in on me even though the place was the cleanest it had been all week. I called Tessa and I tried to sound calm, but the moment she said, "Hey babe," I heard the tightness in my own voice and it cracked. I told her everything, and she went quiet in that scary way she gets when she is trying to be gentle. Finally she said, "Ben, you need to call the bank. You need to protect yourself." And then she said the part that hurt the most, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She said, "I know you love your parents, but they are not acting like people who love you back in the way you deserve." The next morning I called the lender, and the woman on the phone was polite in the way that makes you feel like you are already guilty. She told me there had been an inquiry and a lien connected to my name, and she said she could not discuss details without certain verifications, and my hands were shaking so hard I had to press my palm against the counter. I asked her if my mortgage application was in danger, and she said, "It depends on what we find in final underwriting." That phrase again, subject to final verification, only now it felt like a trapdoor. When I got off the phone, I sat on the edge of my couch and stared at my work boots on the rug like they belonged to someone else. I drove back to my parents' house that evening, not for chili, not for cornbread, but because if I did not confront this head-on, it would eat me alive. Lauren was there again, of course, because she camps out wherever the resources are. This time she had a man with her, a guy named Shane who I had met once at a family barbecue and who always looked like he was trying to sell you something, even when he was just holding a soda. He stood in the living room like security, arms crossed, and I instantly hated him. My mom greeted me with that forced brightness, and my dad asked if I had calmed down, which is the most insulting question in the world when someone has just stolen your identity. I told them I had spoken to the lender, and my dad's jaw tightened. My mom said, "Ben, please do not do anything that could hurt Lauren's future." And there it was, the familiar script. My future was always the thing that could be bent. Lauren's future was always the sacred object everyone had to carry carefully. Lauren stepped forward and said, "Here is the thing, Ben, if you freak out and you make this a legal thing, it will ruin my launch, and then what, you will feel better because you got your way." And I said, "It is not my way, it is my name." Shane finally spoke and said, "Man, families do this stuff all the time, it is just leveraging assets," and I looked at him and said, "Stay out of it." He smirked like I was entertainment. Then my mom did something that made the whole situation worse in one breath. She said, "Your father and I already told the bank you were on board. We already told them you agreed. So if you back out now, you make us liars." And she said it like my job in life was to protect their image. My dad added, "You have always been the stable one, Ben. Do not start acting like Lauren." That line landed like a slap because it was the truth of how they see us. I am stable because they made me hold my own weight and hers. Lauren is allowed to be chaos because they call it passion. That night ended with my dad telling me I was being selfish, my mom sobbing, Lauren storming out, and Shane giving me a look like he had just won a point. I walked out into the cold with my hands shaking again, and I sat in my truck and realized there were new enemies now. Not just my family's favoritism, but their willingness to rewrite reality to keep my sister's plan alive. The climactic moment of Act 2 was not a single sentence. It was the realization that they were already lying to institutions on my behalf, and if I did not stop it, I would be the one paying when the bill came due. 2 days later, my Aunt Marcia called me, and if you knew my family, you would understand why that was surprising. Aunt Marcia is my mom's older sister, a retired CPA who reads mystery novels and never wastes words, and she has always been the one person who can say, "Diane, You are being ridiculous." Without flinching, she said, "Ben, I heard something weird," and my stomach sank because apparently my family was now a group chat. She told me my mom had mentioned at church that things were stressful because Lauren was opening a business and because Ben was being difficult, and Aunt Marcia had picked up on the tone. She asked me what was really going on. I drove to Aunt Marcia's townhouse in Downers Grove that evening, and it felt weirdly safe the moment I stepped inside. Like the air itself was not trying to manipulate me. She made coffee strong enough to peel paint, and she listened while I laid it all out, the loan documents, my name on the papers, the bank, the timing with the mortgage. She did not interrupt, which is how you know she is mad, because Aunt Marcia only goes quiet when she is adding up the numbers in her head. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "They forged your signature." And she said it like she was stating the weather, not a crime. I started to argue because part of me still wanted to believe there was some explanation that made this less awful, but she held up a hand and said, "Ben, I did audits for 20 years. I know what a forged signature looks like, and I know what a family looks like when they are trying to make you swallow it." Then she did something that changed everything. She opened her laptop, logged into some database I did not recognize, and said she still had access to certain public filing tools and credit monitoring systems because of her old professional accounts. She asked if I had run a full credit report, and when I said no, she gave me a look like I had walked into traffic. Within minutes, she had pulled up a list of inquiries and accounts connected to my social, and there were things I had never seen. A small business credit card, a vendor line of credit, an inquiry from a commercial leasing company. They were recent, like within the last 3 months, and my chest tightened. Aunt Marcia pointed and said, "That is not just a home equity line. That is your sister building a whole little tower on your identity." I felt dizzy, like the floor had tilted, and I said, No, that cannot be right, because if it is right, it means this is bigger than my parents trying to help her. It means Lauren has been actively using my name. Aunt Marcia nodded and said, "I am not saying your parents are innocent, but I am saying your sister is not just dreaming. She is doing." And then she added, "There is more," and she clicked into something else. She found an LLC filing under a name that looked like Lauren's brand, and the registered agent name was Shane's, and the listed guarantor was me. My full name, my address, my phone number. My hands started to shake again, only this time it was rage instead of panic. Aunt Marcia told me to breathe, and she slid a legal pad across the table and started writing down steps like she was building a ladder out of a hole. Call your bank's fraud department. Freeze your credit. Notify your mortgage lender. Document everything. And then she said, "You need a lawyer." And before I could even react, she told me she had a friend, an attorney named Victor Ramirez, who owed her a favor because she had helped his mother untangle a tax mess years ago. She said, "He is not flashy, but he is solid, and you need solid right now." The next day I sat in Victor Ramirez's office, a small place in Oak Brook with framed diplomas and a faint smell of printer toner, and I told the story again, only this time I had receipts, credit reports, screenshots, documents. Victor listened with the same calm intensity Aunt Marcia had. And then he said, "This is identity fraud." He said it gently, like he was trying not to scare me, but the words felt like a bell ringing in my skull. He explained options, civil and criminal, and he said something that lodged in my chest. He said, "If you do nothing, you are effectively accepting responsibility for debts you did not create, and lenders will treat your silence like consent." On my way out, Victor asked me one more question. He said, "Are you sure your sister has real investors?" I said she claims she does, and he nodded slowly and said, "In my experience, when someone is using family credit to prop up a business, the investors are often a story, not a reality." That was the climactic moment of Act 3. Not just learning the truth, but finding an ally who could translate my gut feeling into facts, and realizing Lauren's plan might be a mirage held up by my parents' denial and my stolen identity. Victor advised me not to confront them without a plan, which was hard because confrontation is my family's favorite sport, and I had already been playing defense my whole life. Still, I followed his lead. I froze my credit. I filed disputes. I sent formal notices to the lenders involved stating I did not authorize those accounts. I emailed my mortgage lender's underwriting team with documentation, and that email felt like walking into a storm and hoping you do not get struck. Tessa held my hand at my kitchen table while I hit send, and she kept repeating, "You are doing the right thing," like she was trying to talk me out of the guilt my parents installed in me as a child. The family confrontation happened at a place that made it almost comically dramatic. My parents had planned a launch party for Lauren, a little event at a rented space in downtown Naperville with string lights and a balloon arch and a big sign with her brand name in cursive. They invited relatives, neighbors, church friends, anyone who might clap. Lauren was wearing a cream blazer and smiling like she had already won. And Shane was there too, moving through the crowd like he was collecting praise. My mom looked like she was hosting the Oscars. My dad stood near the bar talking to some guy about how proud he was of Lauren for being entrepreneurial, and I watched him say those words with his chest out, like the pride itself could pay bills. I showed up with Tessa, Aunt Marcia, and Victor Ramirez, which sounds like I walked in with a legal posse, and honestly that is exactly what it was. The moment my mom saw me, her smile froze, and she walked toward me fast, cheeks already pink, and she whispered, "What are you doing here?" Like I was crashing a funeral. I said, "We need to talk." She said, "Not now," and I said, "Now is the only time you will listen because there are witnesses." Lauren spotted me and her eyes narrowed, and she glided over with that confident walk, the one she uses when she wants to look unbothered. She said, "Ben, I am busy," and I said, "I know. That is kind of the problem." Shane stepped closer, jaw tight, and Victor quietly said, "My name is Victor Ramirez. I represent Ben Harper," and the energy around us changed instantly, like someone had turned the music down even though it was still playing. Lauren tried to laugh it off and said, "Okay, is this a joke?" And my mom hissed, "Ben, you are humiliating your sister," and I looked at my mom and said, "She humiliated me when she used my name to open accounts." My dad walked over then, face hard, and he said, "You brought a lawyer to your sister's party." And I said, "You brought my identity to her party first." People were staring now. A couple of my cousins had stopped mid-conversation. An older woman from my mom's church held a tiny plate of cheese cubes and looked horrified. Lauren's smile finally slipped and she said, "Ben, you are being dramatic," and I felt something in me go very still. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder Aunt Marcia had helped me build, and I said, "I am going to say this once. These accounts were opened without my permission. My signature was forged. My credit was used. My mortgage is at risk. I need you to admit what you did, and I need you to fix it." Lauren's eyes flicked to Shane for half a second, and that was all I needed to see. Shane put a hand on Lauren's back like he was steering her, and he said, "Look, man, you are overreacting. This is just a standard guarantor situation." And Victor said, "It is not standard if it is fraudulent." Then Aunt Marcia stepped forward, and her voice cut through the noise like a knife. She said, "Lauren, tell them about the investors. Tell them who is actually paying for this." Lauren's cheeks flushed, and my mom said, "Marcia, do not start," and Aunt Marcia ignored her and said, "Diane, I am starting because you clearly will not." Lauren's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find the right spin, and finally she said, "It is complicated." My dad said, "Lauren, what is she talking about?" And Lauren said, "I have interested parties, okay. But they needed proof of traction," and my dad nodded like that made sense, and then she added, "This was just to get us through the first phase," and my mom jumped in and said, "See, Ben, it is temporary, just like we said." Victor asked one question that landed like a brick. He said, "Lauren, did Ben agree to be a guarantor?" Lauren hesitated, and in that hesitation the whole truth started to leak out. She said, "Mom said it would be fine." My mom blurted, "Because you are family," and my dad said, "Diane, what did you do?" And my mom turned on him like a cornered animal and said, "Do not act like you did not sign off, Tom. You said we had to support her." Tessa squeezed my hand, and I realized my palms were sweating, and I said, "Everyone needs to hear this. I did not agree. I did not sign. I did not authorize any of it. I am disputing the accounts. I am filing fraud reports." And then I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and said, "If you keep defending this, you are defending a crime." Lauren's face hardened, and she finally dropped the influencer voice and snapped, "You always have to make it about you." My mom started crying again, louder this time, and she said, "Ben, please do not ruin her." And my dad said, "What about Ben? Diane, what about what you have done to him?" And it was like watching a dam break. My dad's voice rose, and he said, "We have spent years putting Lauren first because you could not handle her being unhappy, and now you dragged our son into debt." The room was dead quiet, the music still playing but meaningless, and my sister looked stunned, not because she felt guilt, but because she was not used to being confronted in public where her charm could not cover it. Then Shane tried one last move. He leaned toward Lauren and said something under his breath, and Lauren's eyes darted around, and she said, "Fine, if you want the truth, there were no investors yet. Okay, there were just conversations, but we needed the space to look legitimate, and the bank would not approve without a guarantor, and Mom said Ben would not say no because he always does the right thing." My mom gasped like Lauren had betrayed her, and I felt this weird hollow laugh rise in my throat because my mom was not upset that the act happened. She was upset that Lauren said it out loud. That was the climactic moment of Act 4. Standing in a room full of people while my sister admitted my parents counted on my compliance the way you count on gravity, and realizing the exposure was not just about money, it was about a family truth that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. After that night, the party did not exactly end, but it dissolved. People drifted away with their coats half on, whispering, faces tight you, and the balloon arch looked suddenly pathetic, like a child's project that got left out in the rain. My parents stayed behind. My mom shaking, my dad looking older than I have ever seen him, and Lauren standing stiff with her arms crossed, jaw clenched like she was daring the universe to punish her. Shane disappeared at some point, which told me everything I needed to know about his loyalty. Tessa and I left before the space fully emptied, and in the car she exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. She said, "I am proud of you," and I nodded, but I did not feel proud. I felt tired, like the kind of tired that sinks into your bones and makes even anger feel heavy. The practical aftermath was messy and unglamorous. Fraud reports, disputes, phone calls that kept looping me through automated menus, letters in the mail with official logos that made my heart race every time. Victor handled what he could, and Aunt Marcia stayed on top of the paperwork like she was born for it. My mortgage approval got delayed, which felt like someone pressing pause on my life, but eventually the lender accepted the disputes and documentation and told me we could proceed once the fraudulent accounts were cleared from active consideration. It was not quick and it was not painless, but it did not destroy us. Tessa and I kept house hunting, and every time we walked through a place, she would slide her hand into mine like a reminder that the future was still possible. My parents, though, fractured in a way I did not expect. My dad apologized to me one afternoon in my apartment, sitting on my couch with his hands folded like a kid in the principal's office. He said he had convinced himself it was not that bad, that it was temporary, that Lauren would figure it out, and he admitted he had been afraid of what would happen if they did not keep rescuing her. He said, "Your mother cannot stand seeing her upset." And I said, "What about seeing me hurt?" And he looked down and whispered, "I failed you." My mom did not apologize, not really. She cried. She said she was sorry things got out of hand. She said she never meant to hurt me, but then she still asked if I could just be patient with Lauren because Lauren was stressed. Even after the truth was exposed, my mom tried to rebuild the same old altar and put Lauren back on it. Lauren did not speak to me for weeks, and when she finally did, she texted a single line that said, "You ruined everything." I stared at it for a long time because part of me still wanted a different sister than the one I got, and I texted back, "You ruined it when you used my name." She responded with nothing, which was her way of keeping control, like silence could make her the victim. A month later, I heard through a cousin that the storefront lease had fallen apart, and that Shane had moved on to some other partner, and that Lauren was telling people the project was on hold because of family betrayal. I did not correct the story publicly because I was exhausted and because I learned something during this mess. Some people will always prefer the version of reality that protects their pride. The resolution is not a neat bow, and I think that is the part that still sits in my chest at night when the apartment is quiet. The truth got exposed, yes, and in a practical sense I saved myself, I protected my credit, I kept my future with Tessa from being ripped away by someone else's recklessness, and that matters. But there is a cost to exposure, and it is not just financial. It is the moment you realize your parents love you, but not in the same way they love your sister, and that love can still be real while also being unfair, and that is a hard thing to hold without it turning into bitterness. Sometimes I replay that January night in my head and I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed quiet, if I had swallowed it like I always did, if I had told myself that being the stable one meant accepting damage as part of the job. I probably would have gotten the house later, maybe, after the debts piled up and the excuses ran out, and I would have carried resentment like a second spine, standing straight on the outside while breaking on the inside. Exposing the truth stopped that, But it also forced me to look at a question I still do not have a clean answer for. If you love people who keep choosing someone else over you, how many times do you let them do it before love becomes permission? I do not know yet what forgiveness looks like for my family, and I do not know if my sister will ever admit what she did without wrapping it in blame. I do know this. In 2026, with snow piled on curbs and the world already loud and stressful enough, I am not willing to be the quiet sacrifice anymore. I want a home with Tessa where the locks work, where the keys are mine, and where family means safety, not paperwork. And if my parents want to be part of that future, they are going to have to decide whether they are ready to love both their kids like we are equally real, even when one of us is not the plan they built their whole identity around.